In both my cottage gardens at Barnsdale, I have followed in the slightly muddy footsteps of my predecessors and included many productive plants. But if you want your borders filled with flowers but your garden small, then you won't have a lot of room for vegetables. And I suppose that a small plot like this doesn't really do justice to the old cottage garden principle. Alas, real cottage gardens where they grew flowers and enough produce for the extended family are few and far between. And even fewer are the real old cottage gardeners whose heads and hands are ingrained with that old rural wisdom that's been handed down through generations of countrymen. Some of the gardeners I met have provided me with a special inspiration. 87-year-old retired farm worker George Flatt well remembers his younger days when his garden was essential for survival. It's still much as it was then, but it's anything but solely utilitarian. Well, it's midsummer now, George. You've been busy, haven't you?
Well, I keep doing, you know, every day. I have an hour or two, and then go and sit down and have a little rest.
Is most of this stuff self-set, or do you
Oh, yes,
sow?
no, that's all set there, you know. That's come every year.
Yeah. You got some good old hollyhocks over there.
Yes, they've been in there several years, you know.
And they keep seeding themselves, do they?
Well, I think the old ones keep coming, you know, every year. Yeah, there is some young ones come up. Of course, I had to do away with some of them, you know, there's too many.
What about things like the Gadisha?
That's just the same as that, you see. They've been all over the garden.
That's a hardy annual, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that seeds itself,
Yes,
does
yes,
it?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. It's really
That's
great.
ever so pretty, though. There's so many different colours, I don't know. Well, there's some there, look.
Yeah.
Some nice colours in, ain't there?
What about the gladioli? Now, you must buy those.
No, I don't. I ain't bought any nut for years. Well, you just take them up and harvest them, you know, and then clean them up and set them again.
You store them over the winter in the house?
Yes, yes.
You've got quite a lot of vegetables up at the end there. You don't worry about putting vegetables in with flowers?
No, I don't trouble them out, no. Yeah. Well, that's just a bit of spare ground I'd got, you see, and I thought, well, I'll put the plants in there.
Yeah. George has an old country experience you won't find in modern textbooks. The common problem of slugs in potatoes, for example, never bothers him.
I've got slugs here. I get in the potatoes, you see, if I don't look after them.
So what do you do?
When I plant the potatoes, look, I put the farmyard manure in, then the potato, then I cover it with soot. I took them potatoes up, I ain't had one slug eating one.
Well, for me, that's almost a good enough reason to take out the central heating.
You mustn't put new soot, you know what I mean. Not right new on, let it be a year old. Yeah. That's the best way.
Yeah.
If that was right new, I'd have to burn the shoots off potatoes, you see.
George grows much more produce than he could possibly use himself.
People have it, you see, my relations come and they have it and they freeze it and do all that sort of work, you see.
And then...
Same as the plums and black currants and gooseberries, and I take all them, then they'll bring me a pie back, you see.
Why don't you freeze it yourself?
Well, I'd no need to. I mean, I can go out and get fresh vegetables every day.
I adapted one of George's bits of improvisation for my own artisan's garden, though I tried to make it a bit more sophisticated. If you want to raise your own seedlings, but you've only got the windowsill to do it on, then you'll find a cold frame is invaluable. You can start off all your early vegetables, you can grow your own bedding plants, and a bit later on you can grow all sorts of cuttings in here too. And it isn't an expensive job. The sides are made with floorboards, and if you buy them second-hand from the demolition contractor, they're really very cheap indeed. Now the tops are made with old windows, and you can very often find those at the replacement window contractors. Now his job is to take old windows out of houses and to put new ones in, and the old ones he very often throws away. So I got mine for nothing. But remember that you've got to really build the frame to fit the window, so get those first. Now I've used mine for raising early vegetable plants, and I'm going to put those out here in my tiny vegetable plot. Now I'm growing the vegetables here on a raised bed, and that I'm quite sure is the best way to get the most amount of vegetables out of the smallest amount of space. Because you've got no access paths in between the rows and all the work is done from the side, you can really cram them in. And because the soil is raised and edged with these boards, that improves the drainage, warms up the soil, and you get them earlier too. In the gentleman's garden, I've got the luxury of a bit more space and a lot more money. So here I've allowed myself a vegetable plot, but I've raised the beds here using these lovely Victorian edging tiles. Now, they're not as expensive as you might think, and I bought them in a place that first started making these things in the 14th century, so I simply couldn't resist. Now, I've raised these a bit earlier too, because here, again, I've got a greenhouse. Now, the greenhouse is hexagonal because that's absolutely ideal for a small garden. You can fit it more or less into any corner. The old cottage gardeners would have had to make use of every square inch of land they could, and my goodness, nothing much has changed today. In order to get the most out of our small vegetable plots, we've got to resow or plant every piece of land as soon as it becomes available. I've just harvested radishes and lettuces from this piece of land, and now it's the turn of the runner beans. Even if you live in the city, use hazel poles to give the country effect. I'm using them to support the variety Painted Lady, which has lovely red and white flowers, so as well as producing delicious beans, it looks good too. On my second visit to George Flat, I was able to enjoy the peas I'd seen him sowing last time. Have you had much off these?
Oh yeah, I had several dinners off there.
Yeah. Tastes lovely. Nothing like fresh peas.
Nice pea. Now, you see that?
What variety are they, George?
Green sleeve drawn. But I don't think you can go buy them now.
Do you collect the seed then?
I did do, yes. I get the seed every year, yes. Most of them I got 8 in, 2, 4, 6 or 7 in there. Yeah, I had a lot with 8 in. I think that's about the most. That lovely pea.
Yeah.
Ever so sweet.
Well, you've got a row of peas over here, George, that are going a bit brown. Are they for collecting seed from too?
Yes, I should save some seed off them. I can put them in the winter time, you see, and then they come early.
What are they then?
Bird's eye. What they grow in the fields, you know that.
Oh, they grow them for canning?
Yeah, that's right.
Freezing.
Any day now I shall pull them up, you see. And
then what will you do?
Well, just rub them out and get the seed out and save for another year.
Yeah. You've got an onion over there as well, a few onions that are going to seed too.
Well, yes, that's for growing them for seed.
George's garden overflows with everything from onions to soft fruit. If you want to grow bumper crops of fruit and vegetables, it's essential to maintain fertility. Now, the old cottage gardeners would have had the manure from their pigs and their chickens. You might not be able to do that, but one thing you can do is to keep a compost heap. Now, every garden should really have 2 compost heaps, one to rot down while the other one's filling up. But the trouble is that in a small garden you can see everything, so even the compost container has to be attractive. Well, another thing the old cottagers did was to keep bees in very beautiful beehives. So why not combine the two and make a novel compost container. Mine consists of 5 frames like this, which are simply screwed together and they fit neatly one on top of the other. And the top is made with feather edge fencing. Most old cottage gardens had a beehive or two, but they didn't contain compost. As we were filming in this garden today, we were suddenly interrupted by a huge swarm of bees. So we promptly took cover inside the house and did, as you should always do on these occasions, phoned the local beekeeper. Well, the bees swarmed all round the windows and eventually found their way under the thatch and into the attic. And by the time Ron Rackett and his friend Barry arrived, it seemed that there was little they could do. The bees settled in the attic and may remain there for several years. But Hannah Hutchinson, who lives there, was reassured to learn that they would leave her well alone. I took advantage of the occasion to visit Ron in his own garden and find out how I could start to learn about beekeeping.
You've got to start off in May. That's when the queens start to lay. The first year, you'll get up to £40 of honey.
Really?
But the second year, you increase your brood to a brood and a half. You're talking 90 to 100,000 bees. And out of that brood and a half, on a good summer, you could top up to £80 of honey per hive.
And are there any special plants that are really good for bees?
They don't like daffodils. Crocuses, they love crocuses,
really?
Which is how we say March.
What else do you think they go for?
Well, the most popular one, if you've got a big enough one, will be the buddleia. They really love that. Catnip, lavender is great.
And will they actually improve the garden?
Yes, definitely. 2 months ago, when we lost our hives through the Bowmora, this garden and my neighbours was dead. There was no bees whatsoever. The apple trees have hardly got any apples on. It was like there's no life left for us. You know, it's dead. Everything's dead round the corner. But now you can sit up there in the evening and see the bees going in and out.
Well, you obviously love your bees, Ron. Do you talk to them?
Yes, you've got to talk to them. If any of the member of the family dies, you should go down and, this is going to sound silly, tap the hive 3 times and tell the bees who died. Bees are wonderful things. You learn a lot from bees. I don't eat honey, can't stand the stuff. Although I have 2 spoonfuls of sugar in my tea, but I will not eat honey. Ooh, it's terrible stuff, too sweet. But I'm allergic to bee stings. Why do I do it, you ask me? I don't know. I enjoy it. It's as good as working.
Bees do a vital job in pollinating flowers and particularly fruit. Crab apples have been grown in cottage gardens since the earliest times, and it's not difficult to see why. For a start, they have flowers that lift the spirits in the spring, and they're followed by very attractive fruits in the autumn. And of course, those fruits too you can eat. Now, the cottage gardeners use those for making things like crab apple jelly, and for jams and preserves and wine too. And of course we can do exactly the same thing today. Now, of course, those old crab apples would have been pretty big trees, and much too big really for our small gardens. But that's one way where we can do a bit better than the old cottage gardeners did, because all crab apples these days, and indeed apples, are grafted onto special rootstocks that keep them nice and small, and so they're ideal for small gardens like ours. Now, you can actually see the rootstock down at the bottom of the plant there, and that's the variety on the top. And it's absolutely essential not to bury that rootstock too deeply, because if you do that, the top of the plant will root into the ground, and of course then you're back to the situation the old cottage gardeners had of having a very vigorous tree. Fruit trees are quite reasonably priced, but George Flatt, like many cottages of old, had an even cheaper way.
Well, I just grew it from a pip, you see.
Did you really?
Yeah. My mother always used to pack me an apple and an orange up for my dinner. And of course I thought it was a lovely apple, I'll save the pip. So I got the pips and brought them home, put them in a flower pot, and that's how I managed to get that.
And what's the apple like?
It was a lovely apple. Yes, it's a nice apple.
What's the variety?
Oh, you don't know, you see. My people from just across the way there, she come over and she said, I was a gathering of them, you see, and she said, lovely apple. She said, can I have one? I said, well, of course you can. I said, you can have an apple. She said, what do you call them? I said, I don't know. I said, I ain't got a name. She said, well, I'll name that. She said, George is special.
The French were the great experts in training fruit trees, and they used to grow apples and pears in particular into some most extraordinary shapes. But it's the flat shapes that really interest us, like the fans, because they take up such a small amount of room. Now, they were enthusiastically taken up by gentlemen gardeners, but the cottagers were a bit reluctant earlier on. But certainly they're very valuable for us. Now, if you haven't got a fence to train them up or a wall, erect a post and wire structure like this and tie some canes to it in the shape of a fan and train the branches onto those canes. And you should also take advantage of the growth habit of the tree. The fact is that if a branch is growing straight up, it will grow much more vigorously. And as it is pulled down like this, it grows less vigorously but produces more fruit. So in the early stages, where you've got weak shoots like this, you grow those for the first year or so straight up the cane, and then later on that will be pulled right down to here to take its proper place on the fan to produce a very beautiful and productive tree. If you're lucky enough to have a wall, you can grow fruit against that. A south-facing wall benefits pears in particular because they need sun and warmth for perfect crops.
This wall is due south and it's a brick lined onto stone so that the wall will actually absorb the heat and help to ripen the pears later on.
So you've got a real storage heater effect, but I suppose you could do much the same sort of thing on a fence, couldn't you?
I don't see why not, provided the fence is good and strong, because pears are very heavy fruits.
Yeah. Well, what really amazes me is that you've got so many pears here in such a small space. How many varieties are there?
I think I've got about a dozen varieties, so that means I've got 24 cordons on this wall.
How far apart are they planted?
They're approximately 2'6" apart,
Yeah.
so they're quite close.
Now, lots of people are put off by the difficulties of pruning cordons like these, but it's not actually a hard job, is it?
I think it's a lot easier than pruning a normal fruit tree.
And of course you do them in the summer, don't you? A little bit earlier than apples?
Yes, I reckon about the early part of August is ideal. And the reason for that is you need to have the shoots ready to ripen the fruit buds for the following year. And by reducing them then, they've got a chance to ripen off.
And what exactly do you do?
Well, what I like to do is to cut back each shoot to approximately 3 to 4 buds.
And of course, every cottage garden should grow soft fruit too. The old cottage gardeners were very enthusiastic about gooseberries, and they've grown them since about the 17th century. But as far as I know, they never grew standard gooseberries. So here's another way that we can get one up on them. Because if you grow a standard gooseberry, of course, you can save all that valuable space underneath and grow something else there as well. it should be planted up against a strong stake because they crop very well, these plants, and they do need a bit of support. And then you put a handful of organic fertiliser over the soil that you've dug out, and then just push that in, firm it down, and that should do well. Now, the one problem with gooseberries is that they don't like root disturbance, so you don't want to be digging round them all the time. So the answer is to plant straight away, right up against them, something which is permanent. We'll just form a nice little bed right round the plant. I'm using this Santolina, which will be planted right up against the gooseberry, and that will form a nice little mound of foliage right the way round, and I won't have to disturb it. Now, the very final job is to support the gooseberry really well. So you want a couple of rose ties here, making sure that you've got the spacer in between the plant and the stake. One at the top and one halfway down. And then you've got a place in the garden which is productive and looks beautiful too. As well as fruit and vegetables, the old cottagers raised animals too, and a few chickens really are a great asset. Now, you can buy a little pen like this for 4 chickens, or it's quite easy to make one yourself. And in the vegetable garden, as soon as you've cleared a piece of land, you put the chickens on it. They'll eat up all your soil pests, they'll scratch around and eat up the weed seeds too. They'll recycle all your vegetable waste into really good manure and fertiliser. And just as a little bonus, they'll lay your breakfast egg for you too. Another cottage garden must were herbs. Lynn Rayner is following a family tradition.
My grandmother used to grow herbs. She always used to talk about herbal medicine and how they used to use it in the old days, and she always used to have bunches of herbs hanging, drying in a kitchen, and there was a characteristic smell with it that always, you know, it brings that time back to me. And when I got my first home, I wanted to grow a herb garden, and you couldn't buy the herbs in garden centres at the time, so I took to growing my own from seed, and really the collection started from there, literally. Not only were they useful, but they were simple, they were beautiful, they attracted the bees, the butterflies, the wildlife, and it all seemed to come together somehow.
Yeah, but do you actually use this bit of the garden?
The roses are used in the potpourris, and we also have some medicinal plants on this bank as well, such as this one. This is the poke root, that's the North American Indian word for it, Phytolacca americana. That was used and is used for rheumatic conditions and is very effective.
Just at the back there, you've got borage. I grow borage, and I grow it because it's one of the loveliest herbs of all, I think.
Yes.
And seeds itself all over the place. But I don't drink a lot of Pim's number 1, so what do I do with it?
Well, we use it in salad, really. The flowers are edible, and they're so pretty, and the thing to do is to take one off, and if you just get hold of the black bit in the centre and pull the back off, it comes away very nicely, and then very carefully ease away the middle, and that in a salad bowl it looks beautiful and it tastes beautiful also. And it's really big business in the catering industry now.
Now, this is southern wood, isn't it?
That's
What's
right.
that used for?
Well, it can be used as a rinse for dark hair. It makes dark hair shine, and also it can be dried as a moth repellent in wardrobes. But actually, my father-in-law, who was a Yorkshireman, once told me that when they went courting, they used to put a piece in the lapel like that, and when they met the lady, they would say, smell that, and she would bend down to smell it, and as she bent down, they would kiss.
Oh,
It's quite a nice story.
And that's why it's called ladslap.
That's right.
Well, you raise a lot of stuff yourself, I know, from cuttings, obviously, and a lot from seed, which is cheap. But you've got a fantastic border here, which must have cost you no more than a few pounds.
That's right, yes, it's very inexpensive if you raise everything from seed or, as you say, do cuttings yourself.
All hardy annuals?
That's right, yes. The Viper's Bugloss is a biennial. But
Yes,
yeah,
that's lovely, isn't it, the Viper's
it
Bugloss?
is. It's a native wildflower, but you don't see it around very much
No,
these
it's a great
days.
shame, isn't it?
It is, because it's superb.
And I grow this ladybird poppy myself.
Yes.
I'm besotted with that.
I know, it's wonderful, isn't it? Yeah, how do they get the black spots in the middle of the
Well, I don't know. Over the past year, I've been visiting wonderful cottage gardens and coming back to Barnsdale fired up with even greater enthusiasm. So, all I need now for my new cottage gardens to become as mouth-watering as the old ones we've seen is a bit of growth. And fortunately, that's something that nature will do for me. The truth is that in cottage gardening, it's nature who's the real artist. All we have to do is to behave like a sort of umpire just to make sure that we get the results that we want. Now, of course, it does take a bit of time, but believe me, every minute you spend in a garden like this is pure, unadulterated joy. Now, as I've admitted, the gentleman's garden is expensive. For me, it's the sort of thing that we all eventually aspire to. But once you get started, it doesn't have to take very long. Remember that I started planting this just 5 months ago. The artisan's garden is a year older, but I suppose this is the one that I've enjoyed building the most. Just like the countrymen of old, you have to use your ingenuity here, and you have to master a few basic do-it-yourself skills. But if you can use a saw, a hammer and a spade, well, you're home and dry. And do bear in mind that all of these plants can be easily propagated from seed or cuttings. So all you have to do is to cultivate a few gardening friends, and just like the cottagers of old, you can fill your garden with plants for next to nothing. Just remember the words of wise old William Robinson. Be kind to your plot, keep it fertile, and let the flowers tell their story to the heart.